All right, guys, let's get into this real quick. So, what we need to know is this basically, we are going to be talking about essentially why the federal government is in a shutdown right now. And it's not something that's really been talked about in a heavy way on the legacy news channels. So, Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, those places aren't really getting into why this is happening. You're getting very top cursory level stuff. You're not getting deep down on what's happening. And I'm going to tell you because it directly relates to a portion of SSI benefits. You see, back in the day when Biden was in, it was a weird time. People who were veterans were getting kicked out of their apartments to go ahead and create more housing for immigrants. It was just a weird time. It was what I like to think of as the dead zone of American presidential capacity for a lot of reasons. And as a result, we had some really terrible, I can't believe it happened that way moments. Now, moving forward in time, we have Trump. Trump saw an opportunity to escalate the growth of the government, to downsize, if you will, the size of it. This is happening because of health, medical related funding. But why is it happening? Originally, back in the day when Biden was brought in, the Supplemental Security Income Program had three main portions. Number one, they paid for people over 65 who were impoverished. Number two, they paid for disabled people who were impoverished. And number three, they paid for refugees, immigrants, asylum seekers, entrants, and those who were trafficked. It is that third part that was never fully manipulated at the level that was intended. What do I mean? If you recall going backwards in time, there was the Department of Homeland Security, there was FEMA, there was U.S. Customs and Border Protection, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, HHS, the Office of Refugee Resettlement, that's who paid for the hotels, the shelter, the medical treatment. They spent massive amounts of money on basically immigrants that had a quasi-legal status. You even had Medicaid prepping and beginning the battle to create a new immigrant-related Medicaid-oriented program to allow massive amounts of new immigrants to use the Medicaid that the current disabled, that the current SSI 65 plus individuals are using. In which case, instead of seeing the doctor in 3 to 6 months, you would see them in 12 to 2 years. So the bottom line was this, okay? As you know, the current argument between the Democrats and the Republicans is over immigrants who are here legally. Are these immigrants really here legally? Well, the funny thing about that is that the definition of a legal immigrant is not defined very specifically in many different areas of immigration law. It's not. You have some good definitions, but then you have lots of caveats and gray area. And what happened was the Biden administration, buying through the Democratic Party, wanted to vote farm, massively vote farm, because they had a problem. And the problem was that they were moving so far left that the middle and all the Republicans were now joining the Republican side. You know, people were literally listening to Andrew Tate, and they couldn't take it. They were listening to, basically Fox News, and they hated that. They were listening to America First, and they did not want that. What they wanted was immigrants first. So you had all these different groups, mass funding, people coming in, and then going through the fastest, most oriented way that they could to getting people who were here quasi-legally to become legal. Okay, cool. I mean, they had tens of millions of individuals coming illegally, but, that was Kamala Harris who was put in charge of that one, which obviously she did not much to fix it. As a result of these different groups, HHS, ORR, Medicaid, right? ICE, right? DHS, FEMA, as a result of all these groups financially feeding the frenzy to create people who would normally not be able to immigrate to America, but were now mass influxing into America, they use these agencies to fund the transition from illegal immigrant to quasi-legal immigrant, where you're held over, to legal immigrant on track. So when the Republicans say they're trying to pass these sort of things, these health insurance options, these financial cuts to help certain individuals, the Republicans are saying it's for illegal immigrants. And technically they're wrong, because it's not really for illegal immigrants, because the Democrats used billions of dollars, potentially trillion. We don't even know the full numbers yet, but billions of dollars absolutely, to create lots of quasi and on the right track legal immigrants. So the Republicans are saying, hey, there's all these illegal immigrants. And in the normal world, where people would enter the United States in the traditional way of using a door, that would be correct, right? Because these immigrants coming through the door, they would have to go through the process. They would have to get, legally protected under the immigration process and begin their actual, transition. But that's not how it worked under Biden. So are the Republicans correct that these are illegal immigrants that will benefit? No. Are they realistically correct that many of these immigrants should have never been made legal immigrants? Yes. So ultimately, at the end of the day, is the funding going to go to people who would normally be in an illegal status in the United States, but are not because the Biden administration mass allowed people through many ways? Some of them are fraudulent. You can read the articles where basically they had to write down the housing that was going to support them or where they were going to go live. There was like 10,000 entries on one house here, 5,000 entries on another house here, all that stuff. Just a lot of fraud. Okay, we all know it. They finally caught a bunch of it. So we have a lot of people here who are here that shouldn't be here, but they are, and they're farther down the road of becoming immigrants that are legal because Biden's administration wanted to vote for him. Cool. Everybody's got that. Everybody's pretty solid on that at this point. So as a result of that, the Democrats needed a second term. They needed Biden in or Harrison for a second term to then, instead of using DHS and FEMA and basically, CBP and ORR, instead of using those groups, they were going to use the Social Security Administration's general taxation provision, where basically they could take the money from general taxes and spend it on supplemental security income recipients, which happens to fall into those individuals who are directly affected by the Trump cuts. Those are your entrants who are refugees, asylum seekers, and those who were trafficked. So just giving you an understanding as to essentially why, the Democrats are pushing for these types of inclusions. It's not for in majority. It's not for in minority. It's just like the slightest bit it might help an American. The slightest bit. This is all about immigrants. Okay. It's all about immigrants, many of which should have never come in, that are here legally because the Democratic Party got them to be that way. Okay. Here we go. The restoration of Medicaid, the CHIP eligibility for lawfully present immigrants. And remember that lawfully present, that's the gray room. How lawful are they while they are present in the United States? That's the gray room on the definition. So the idea is Trump wants to reverse the cuts that they gave to basically these refugees, asylum seekers, parolees, temporary, they're allowed to be in this country, the parolees for like humanitarian purposes, for humanitarian reasons, whatever, right? Victims of human trafficking, potentially domestic violence of their country, and then some other groups, right? But in majority, it falls directly in line with what we normally give SSI benefits to for the immigrants to receive 7 years of SSI benefits. Just like a disabled person in this country, just like an elderly person in this country who hasn't worked much, paid in much, whatever. Same kind of check, same kind of gig, 7 years, 2-year option, if they can prove that they still need it. Now, I know that many of you have probably seen the videos where they study countries in Europe when it comes to, places like, let's say, Northern Europe, Southern Europe, Western Europe, or you go all the way up to, the areas right before you get to Russia. And the main thing is, what they've now learned is that many of the immigrants that were brought in, that were legalized under the super left, have massively increased the amount of violence, rapes, and other types of, interactions. And as a result, you're seeing in, places like Britain, seeing places like France, where there's a massive uproar where people are saying, hey, these other cultures are not accommodating the culture that they just moved to. And I mean, the real shocking stuff, if you get a chance, go look up the rapes. It is mind-boggling. We're talking about, like, in a short period, a small amount. And then when you bring the immigrants in from these other places, things like Haiti and Africa and stuff like that, in the Middle East, they shoot into the tens of thousands. And that's because religiously, right, certain immigrants that are non-Christian, non-Judaism, but fall into Islam, if a person or a female is not of Islam, they're not viewed as a traditional human, right? So abuse upon them is kind of like abuse to an animal, which is acceptable to them. Not obviously people who respect farms, grew up on farms, like me. So as a result of this, what's happened is we had a mass influx of immigrants. And they were from all over. Some were from Europe, some were from the Netherlands, some were from Turkey, some were from, South America, yada, yada, yada. We had a lot of immigrants come in that should have never been able to come in the way that they did. They were then quasi made legal. And now the Democrats are pushing for those quasi-made legal individuals to be able to stay. Why? Because if they get to stay, many of them will be able to then access supplemental security income, where they will draw on the federal government from the taxes that are paid for by the working class for 7 years plus a 2-year up option. This means that these individuals will be able to live free for 7 years. Now, here's what the Democrats lost when Trump won. When Trump won, he put a hold on more immigrants coming in, and he got rid of a bunch of them and sent them back to their origin country, although there were mistakes here and there, no doubt about it. He screwed up on some of them. Although it was weird to see Democrats defending literally a person who had gang, tattoo initials and things like that all over his body. And they're like defending this person to the nth, be like, he's not from that country. He's not a gang. It's just like, wow. I mean, pick your heroes a little bit better, guys, So at the end of the day, what happened was Trump said, no, we're cutting this off. We're not doing any more of this immigration, thing. They have to use the door. They got to come through the proper gate. They have to go through the proper process. The Democrats said, if you do this, we will lose all of these potential future voters for the Democratic Party. And that's because a shift occurred. When the shift was very simple. The Democratic Party lost some main players that were crucial for their votes, that were crucial for their funding. Okay? Who were they? Well, obviously, the people I come from, the Jewish people, we largely moved away from the Democratic Party. Okay? Because it is our culture to not be targeted by those who practice things of Islam. Obvious reasons. If you need a bigger definition on that, then you should start with just studying basic religion. Just learn about what happened in the Middle East with the churches that were there and they were converted to Islam, and what the giant wars that happened, the guys, the cross, big red cross on them, the Knights Templar, anybody? So anyways, the point is they lost the Jewish voters. And also with that, the large funding that comes from the Jewish voters. And as a result, it made it really, really difficult to go ahead and, keep on track in the method that was going on. So the Democrats had to rely on other sources of funding. Foreign nations, they had to rely on a new group which is mostly those of, a particular religious background, of Islam, of the Middle East, things like that. Now, what happened there? You noticed also that the African American, right, minority group in America started to lean more to the right. And what was interesting about it was that it wasn't the Caucasians saying this is what's happening to African Americans. It wasn't the Latinos saying, hey, this is what's going on with the African Americans. It was the African Americans who now have, police officer jobs, sheriff's jobs, teachers' jobs, accounting jobs, banking jobs, these jobs. They all have the same jobs that everybody else has, right? Same incorporation into society. And what happened was they said, hey, wait a minute, what are the Democrats really doing for us? And that was tough. That's when we started to hear Biden come out with, if you don't vote for me, then you're not black and all these things, right? So we started to see that shift occurring. And that shift that occurred pulled the classic minority-based groups away from the Democratic Party. So the Democratic Party needed a solution. And it had to be a damn good one because they were losing a lot of people. And they were losing them fast. And it was largely because of, honestly, people getting away from the legacy news channels. I'm not saying Fox News is good. I'm not saying CNN is good. I watch them both from time to time. But what I am saying is people started to listen to other people on YouTube and Facebook and X and Instagram and blogs, right, that were out there. And they started to research and learn and realize what was actually going on. And when that happened, it changed everything. Because all of a sudden, people did not want to be a victim anymore because it didn't pay to be a victim and have the politicians try and fund your victimhood. That's what happened. People didn't want to be a victim anymore. They didn't want their race to be a victim. They didn't want their religion to be a victim. They didn't want their class existence to be a victim. They didn't want it. I remember making videos about how ridiculous it was that we fought poverty by race instead of fighting poverty where people are poor. I remember those videos. We were making those videos 5 years ago. So as a result of this, what ultimately happened was that people who are Americans, who classically did not believe themselves to be Americans, now all of a sudden you see, people from Cuba, people from all kinds of parts of South America and all kinds of parts of Africa and all kinds of parts from this place and that place and this place and that place, South China Sea, coming to America and having flag shirts on during the 4th of July because they own that. They own that shit. That was theirs. They knew America was theirs. And they knew that if they played the victim card, they weren't going to make enough off the politicians trying to give them something. So they'd rather go the other way and earn their way to a better future. And that's what they did. And that was that massive transition that happened. And it totally changed the entire dynamic that this country had. Because instead of it just being colonials are evil, it became a thing of what can I build for myself in America? And that's why I always say the disabled and retired are a fragile class because they don't have that same option. That's why I always say the only real victims here are not the people running around with the multicolored hair and this and that. Yes, some of them are victims in and of themselves by how people treat them. But at the end of the day, it is those who are physically unable, blind, mentally unable, those who are too elderly to be able to work, to earn a way in life. I don't know if a lot of you know this, but for most of my youth, I had to hide what my Jewish background, my Jewish heritage, I had to hide all of that stuff because I lived in a farm area. We couldn't talk about it. You wouldn't. You would have had people doing horrible things. So as a result, we didn't talk about it. Was I a victim of that? Of course. Has society moved forward? Of course. Do I still worry about stuff? Of course. But the bottom line here that you have to understand is that it's just mind warping to imagine that people believe, that the groups that don't need the most attention. Okay, so imagine this. Pick for me the groups that you believe need the most assistance. Walk me through it. Well, the disabled aren't able to work because they're impaired, because physical, mental, or blindness limits their ability to earn money by putting in work product and then getting paid for it. That is a real victim class. Yet, how many politicians support making sure our disabled are taken care of? Very few. It goes on one hand. That's how many. What about our elderly, right? How many of you thought during the Biden or prior Trump administration that the retired are really being taken care of? Now, remember, Trump started strong because he just passed, rules about reducing taxation on earnings for retired people, which is right in line with the, Republican logic. Go out, work, earn more, keep more of what you earn. Okay. So as a result of this, I just don't think we have a proper understanding of what our victim class should be. Our victim class that we should spend time, that we should spend effort, that we should spend money on are our disabled and our retired, our widows and our, children that don't have parents. That, right? Our veterans who are impaired. That is where we should spend our time and money. Not on mass immigration followed by mass budget options for people who probably should not have been able to access this country to begin with without taking the proper and necessary steps to do it. As a result, let me go through what they are. Basically, there is essentially this idea where we have to go ahead and reduce the costs of certain types of, buy-ins for Medicare, certain options for Medicaid, certain options for, essentially our healthcare plans that are on the marketplace. It's about 20 million Americans that will be affected. But then there's also a lot of people that are refugees, asylees, parolees, traffickees. I made that last one up, but it's people who are trafficked, who are essentially going to benefit from these cuts. It would take one sentence for the Democrats to fix this by saying, yes, we want to give the cuts to people who are citizens on SSI. Yes, we want to give the cuts to people who are disabled. Yes, we want to give the cuts to people who are retired. It would take one sentence to get the Republicans on board, but they won't do it. And that is because they are losing all those people that they brought into this country, created a quasi-legal existence and connection to the country with in hopes to vote for them. And that is why, unfortunately, our government is shut down. That is the real reason. It is because they spent billions upon billions bringing people in because their intention was to get them and fund them so that they could ultimately go into SSI, and they would ultimately win on SSI, go through the process of having full green card status, full citizenship, and you guessed it, be able to vote. That is why. And that is why the Republicans have the Democrats right here. Because at the end of the day, Trump can find ways to fund certain things. He can fund, right? And he doesn't have to find a way to fund the elderly or the disabled because the money comes from the trust funds for the most part. And the SSI people, he can find that money because it's just not that many people. We're talking 8 million people in total. He can find a way to make that happen. So the point that I'm getting at is Trump, it sounds like he's already working out and, basically funding the military personnel, funding, single moms, stuff like that. So what's happening is all of these special classes of individuals, all of these special classes of people, okay, that the Democrats normally use as their victimhood, as the thing that they go into their locker and say, these are our victims, Republicans, you have abused them, therefore you're evil. All of these people are going to get funded because they'll find money and ways to pay them. So then the question becomes, why are the Democrats still holding out for the parolees, the refugees, the asylum seekers, those who are trafficked? And that is because they need as many of those as they can to replace the Latinos, the Jews, and the African Americans. And if they can do that, then they can start to rebuild on a new class of individuals. Now, I think many of you have realized that the Republican Party has swelled in how many people it has. It has swelled in how popular it is. As a result, there are counter-existing parties who don't get along with each other in the Republican ranks. You will also notice that in the Democrat ranks, because the main things that they're pushing for now are immigrants, many of which come from Islam background or, some sort of situation like that, and the LGBTQ plus community, which are inherently, if you have seen the videos, now getting into fights at their different parades that they're having, because obviously Islam is not a big fan of anything LGBTQ plus. Okay, that's just not how they work. So the point that I'm getting at is they're trying to go ahead and restore Medicaid, CHIP eligibility. They're trying to go ahead and preserve the emergency Medicaid reimbursement program. They're trying to do ACA subsidies for undocumented individuals. What you need to understand about this is that these ACA subsidies, specifically in the wording, include undocumented immigrants. Now, the problem with that is that at the end of the day, they could cut that out. But where do undocumented or illegal immigrants go to when they need medical treatment? Well, they want to do funding to the hospitals, for the hospital emergency rooms, for those who are illegal immigrants needing medical treatment. My question to you is, should we pay for illegal immigrants to get emergency hospital room treatment? Consider the alternative. If you don't, because normally we would never be in this position. We had Biden, which is its own weird little spot in American history. But traditionally, we would never be in this position, right? Where there was just so many people, so many new immigrants that were quasi-legal. What happens when they get injured? Do we let them get worse? What happens when they're in a car accident? Do we let them pass away? Where do we draw the line? They're already here, right? We've already been mass exporting people, but a lot of them are already here, and they've met the very simple, low bar level legal standard of being somebody who is now legally here, right? And you got to understand, that's the problem with this whole legally. I've had interns who came from other countries, and lived in America, that stayed past their stay by a week, a month, 2 months, whatever. And then all of a sudden they're now encroaching on illegal status. But, it's like, again, there's how well defined it is. Not very good. Not very good. So what do we do with them? Do we go ahead and fund these emergency rooms to take care of these immigrants? Do we not? Obviously, we have to fund them to take care of whoever's going in there. If they have a gunshot wound or a knife wound, or they hurt their arm working on a farm somewhere, we got to pay for it. Because at the end of the day, we can't turn them down and say, no, we can't treat you. Because then that falls on the hospital, because the hospital is going to treat them. And then all of a sudden, the hospital is going to be very upset because they've got all these immigrants coming in seeking treatment and no money for it. So what do? Do we subsidize the hospitals? Do we subsidize those who are here quasi-legally? What do? And this is really what this whole fight is about. The fight is about, what do we do with people that were made quasi-legal immigrants that should have never been allowed into this country? A bunch of them came through literally broken fences, doors that were welded open. Absolute insanity. And so I guess from my perspective with this situation, as a disability attorney working with the disabled, working with the veterans, things like that, we can never do another Biden-Harris thing like that again. We can't afford it. The amount of money that HHS and the Office of Refugee Resettlement, you remember, they were paying for hotels, nice hotels in the cities, New York City. They were renting the entire hotel and kicking people out. Some of them were veterans, disabled veterans. So I guess from my perspective, how do you clean up this mess? I'm just glad we don't have more of this mess at this point, because if we had more of this mess, do you guys ever think about that? Like what that would equate to? Let me use a sound effect. This is where it really gets funky. Imagine if Harris had 4 years. Imagine if all of those immigrants that came in that were made legal by, a little schmoozy here, a little schmoozy there on the forms, right? Imagine how long it would take for you to be able to go see a doctor, especially in the Medicaid field with Medicaid doctors. You got tens and tens of millions of new people coming in that are going to want to seek medical treatment. So how long would it take for a current SSI recipient to be able to see their doctor when the doctor is constantly booked out and constantly paid for by Medicaid? Because they would have moved them onto SSI. We don't have enough doctors for it. It's like when you set up like a new housing area, you got to make sure there's like a school there. You got to make sure there's like, enough, a hospital there, a medical facility there, utilities are set up, utilities are run. You got to set all that stuff up ahead of time before you bring a massive amount of people to go live in these new houses. America didn't have any of that. We had tens and tens of millions of people come in without the infrastructure for them. And it's obvious of that because you saw them being placed in cages left and right, and the cages were filled. So imagine that. You wouldn't be able to see a doctor for a while. Okay. Now imagine that we greatly increase by millions and millions and billions of dollars a year how much taxpayers have to then pay for all the new immigrants coming into this country. And we need immigrants. We need them too. We don't have enough people working and paying taxes to pay for all the things we spend money on already. We don't. We don't. And a lot of you are like, it's okay, just raise the spending limit, just keep spending. And then I look at that person and I go, if you knew how economics worked, how basic accounting functioned, you would realize that the money machines that print digital money inside our government are eating themselves alive because the money that the working class earns isn't enough to buy stuff like it used to in a big way. So as a result of this, we then ask ourselves, okay, what would happen with the dispersion of benefits? Well, think about it. If we had that many more new people on SSI benefits, right? All these new illegal made legal immigrants that were then put into the categories of a refugee, asylum seeker, or somebody who's trafficked under the umbrella of entrance. We had that. What would that do? Well, the first thing that would happen is the government would look at how many new SSI recipients there were, and they'd say, boy, this is getting very expensive. Well, who do you think would bear the brunt of that? Well, it'd be the working class. That's number one. And number two, it would be the disabled SSI recipients. You ever think about that? Think about it for a moment. The rules are pretty straightforward for who gets to receive SSI benefits on the entrant category and the old age category, those over 65, right? But those who basically don't have it perfectly written out with nice little, this is what you get when this happens and da-da-da-da-da, are the disabled. There, it's a culture. The law is not specific because there's no way to make it specific. We have listings, listed impairments that you have to meet, equal, or exceed, or have medical equivalency to, is what the Supreme Court stated. Or basically put it in simple terms, you had to be like them or be worse than them. And if you're not, you had to be found disabled on a vocational allowance showing that you could not work. Well, think about that culturally. How many disabled people would not be found disabled because the culture of having too many SSI immigrants go onto SSI would force SSI to try and reduce its numbers. It can't reduce them on the 65-year-olders because if they're poor and they haven't paid enough to get enough quarters of coverage for retirement, then they got to go on SSI retirement. You guessed it. You guessed it. That one's straightforward. That one's you check boxes if you meet the requirements. But disabled SSI recipients, they would have tried to reduce that to offset how many immigrants are coming in. Which is weird. Because think about this. Most SSI recipients are de facto going to vote for Democrats. So they would have had to go ahead and sacrifice to be able to afford basically future SSI disabled recipients that would vote Democrat for future 7-year plus immigrants. And you know why? It was a smart move. It was a smart move on behalf of the Democrats. And I'll tell you why. You see, with the Democrats, they know what are the rates of a female making more children. Nobody does like the whole, like, can a male have children? We don't do that with fertility rate math. With the accounting of fertility rate, we don't do any of that. What is your gender? Are you male? Are you a male that can have children? It's none of that stuff, okay? It's just how many females are having how many kids? Fertility rate, new generations of humans being born. Well, these immigrants, they, through their culture, are having lots and lots and lots of children. And the Americans are having fewer and fewer children because they can't afford them. So the immigrants will take over and replace the citizens by the amount of children that are born. And therefore, the immigrants in their culture will take the primary spot. It would take the majority spot at dictating the future of everything. So, would Sharia law have potential in America? Absolutely. Because Christians are being outbred. And a lot of Christians are also just trying to be able to afford basic things at this point. They just don't have a lot of money. The jobs aren't there. They don't pay like they used to. There's no pensions. Just is what it is. So as a result of this, at the end of the day, it was a brilliant maneuver on behalf of the Democrats. Yes, it was going to turn America more into a South America / Middle East, mixture. Okay. Yes, the traditional, farming Americans, that whole lifestyle, that whole existence would be desolated, gone. Yes, women would have, of course, had to wear burqas. They would have to, of course, not be able to be present outside without a male, or, their education would have to stop. They wouldn't be able to go and do upper level high school. They in many instances, they would be restricted to 6th grade or 9th grade with their education. They would not be able to hold political positions. They would not be able to hold managerial jobs or managerial positions within corporations. The culture of America would change. Now, this is interesting because the Democrats are also pushing female rights. It's your body. You decide what you want to do with it. But yet, obviously, 10 years from now, if we had had 4 more years of Kamala Harris, it would have been more anti-female rights because of the new cultures that were coming in, which is, again, another thing nobody ever talks about. So what's interesting about this is that we know that if they were able to, and they weren't able to, they got cut off because Trump got in, successfully convert more of these illegal entrants into legal entrants, into legal stay, into legal immigrant. If they were able to do that, they were going to be able to get them onto SSI. If they got them onto SSI, then they were going to mass produce, because we as the working class would have paid a monthly check to the new immigrants to mass produce children. And, the type of communities that would have likely very, very successfully grew, right, and grow to these massive amounts of children being born would be those who are, of course, of Islam and those who are of South America. Those would have been the two main competing, existing future American cultures. Now, I'm not saying the current American culture is good. It's really, it's nothing like what I expected to grow up in. I grew up in a farm country area, milking cow kind of stuff. You know what I mean? You had chickens, you had eggs, you had horses, you had hay, you had all kinds of pastures and fields, you had implements on tractors, all that stuff. I grew up in a Kubota family. That's what we mostly used. So what's happening is the Democrats are now stuck in a spot because they know that there's a lot of poor Americans who need to have these subsidies, these ACA subsidies, to make it cheaper for them to have their health insurance. But they're not willing to get away from the restoration of Medicaid's CHIP eligibility for lawfully present immigrants. They're going to lose. That particular demand, they're going to lose on. Because all Trump has to do is find ways to fund the young women with children, the young men with children, the service members, and keep Social Security running. And you know what the interesting part of it is that if you cut out massive portions, right, of the US government, you should be sitting there thinking every day, how has this shutdown affected me? Some of you, it's affected it in a very large way. Some of you has no effect at all. No effect at all. Now, I'm not trying to preach to you which way this should go. I don't have any control over what Chuck Schumer or AOC or Pelosi or, Trump or JD Vance or any of the, the North Dakota majority. I don't have any control over the direction of this thing. I don't. But at the end of the day, you've got to sit back and wonder, because, we live in a republic. We vote people in, they vote on stuff for us because we trust them to vote in our best interest, although obviously they don't. You've got to then ask yourself, what are you willing to see? Do you want to see immigrants not having emergency room treatment? Or if they do have emergency room treatment, are you willing to see hospitals have to cover it without being properly funded? Because remember, they got to pay for these immigrants to come in and get treated at the emergency room, but then they're not getting refunded by, Medicare or Medicaid. Then real quick, they're going to go ahead and have to cut costs somewhere else, which means cut costs on your emergency room treatment. What do you want? What do you think would work? What do you think is proper? Okay. So I think at the end of the day, you just have to kind of keep in mind this situation because it's tough. And, it's tough because none of you are really in. How many of you live to enjoy politics? None of you. None of us enjoy politics. It's all shit. It takes a weird, fanatical type of individual to want to be in politics, to want to go to that many dinners, to sit in front of and be next to people for that many photo ops, to constantly be posting bullshit crap online about how they were so thankful to meet with this group and hang out with this person. Oh my goodness, they're my good friend and blah, 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 blah. It takes a weird, fanatical person to want to be a politician. It does. But some of them do. And some of them need to feel loved like that, need to feel seen and appreciated like that. My point to you is this, and I don't think you're going to really get the full story from what's actually going on with, Fox News or CNN or, any of these other ones, Newsmax or whatever. My point to you is Social Security is way more important than any of these politicians realize. And most Americans do not realize that the more immigrants we have, the more of a cost it will take on Social Security for those that get to go into SSI's 7-year plus option. We need immigrants because we need people to work and pay taxes. But at the same time, we need immigrants that are going to work, right? Because if you bring in a lot of immigrants that go on SSI, have a bunch of kids and do nothing but take care of the kids, then they're not working. They're just creating massive amounts of children. And many of those children, as proven from reports, not only this country, but many others, end up on welfare themselves. Generational welfare over and over. It was a risky game. I got to hand it to the Democrats. They would have only done this because they knew they were being desperate with their situation. I mean, think about it. You would have to, as a Democrat, support Islam and at the same time support LGBTQ+. These two groups are completely against each other. One is all about the rights of humans and being treated fairly. Nobody's ever going to be equal. Nobody's ever going to be perfect, but try and treat everybody, equally. Be nice to people. Hire people that maybe don't come from the same background you do. Give them a shot. Give them a chance. Right? And then the other group has a specific set of laws that they follow, a religious specific set of laws, which are, obviously it's fire and ice. You know what I mean? Those two are just, they're not compatible. So what happens now? What I think is going to happen is that the Republicans are just going to sit back and let the Democrats try and prove to people that it is the poor and the immigrants who need to have this extra money. And I agree, the poor need it. And some of these immigrants need it too. They sure do. They're going to need hospital visits, and we got to pay the hospital to go ahead and see them. So at the end of the day, Trump's going to let this thing keep rolling. Now, the Democrats are going to have to get the American people on their side. They don't have the numbers, and they don't have really good seated positioning. You know what I mean? Sometimes the Democrats, they got the good spot, the good seat. This is not it. This is not their win. So then you got to ask, how did they get in this spot? It is my belief at the midterm that we're going to see the transition of the Democratic Party becoming the end of the Democratic Party that had a bunch of Clinton era types of Democrats. That's not going to be what a Democrat is in the future. I mean, it's not what it is now, but over the next, I would say year, right? What we're going to be seeing is essentially the stylistic approach of a Democrat to believe that there's some Kennedyisms, there's some Clintonisms, there's some, first couple of months to a year of Obama-isms. Those are gone. Those people will be pushed out, spit on. They will not be left enough to be acceptable for the Democratic Party. And then you'll be seeing the new kids coming up, and the Democratic Party will become a lot of the new kids, pushing a lot of the academia placement in the brain of future generations of people to believe in extreme left, which is reparations for African Americans. I mean, they don't care about the slaves that were Irish. They don't care about the slaves that were Scottish. They don't care about, the history of where the word slave even comes from, how it was basically a term used for whites, where those who were of the Middle East area were enslaving them. It's just one of those things where it's gotten to a level of stupidity that I can't back. And I think that the problem with it is this. I would love to see the Republicans at this point. I would love to see the Republicans try to reach out to, the LGBTQ plus community and work out a deal where they create new sports leagues that run with the male and the female ones specifically for those individuals. I'm telling you, they could do that. I'm telling you, it would be amazing if they did that. Give them their own place to practice sports. We do it with the disabled. We have Special Olympics. It's an incredible thing. People who would never be able to compete now have a place. They have a purpose. Seeing a disabled person kick ass at the Olympics is incredible. It is incredible. Why have we not done that for the LGBTQ plus community, specifically for trans individuals? Why not? Well, what makes the disabled so different from that? Right? The disabled weren't able to compete against the same groups, right? Because there was some sort of issue, right? A blindness issue. It could have had an amputee issue. Could have had some sort of joint issue. Could have had some sort of neurological issue, right? So we created a special class of options for them. I'd really like to see the Republican Party do better on that. I would really like the Republican Party to also do a better job of assessing what's happening with new cultures that have come into this country and better defining what the culture of America actually is. Because I'm seeing a lot of videos where you have people screaming at, Latinos and Caucasians that they don't have a culture, because of the color of their skin. And that's not acceptable. Everybody has a culture. Everybody comes from something. I'll tell you, the people I come from, our culture is vast because we through wars and mistreatment. The British mistreated us, Scottish heritage. Then we made it over to Ukraine, Austria, Germany. Obviously, Germany mistreated us, right? Then we had to come to the US. And now I actually live in the area where a lot of my people ended up settling, right? And that's what it is. Like the people that are constantly abused the most tend to huddle. Because, like, we all know the shit that people do. So as a result of that, it's just one of those things where I hope you start to question what the Republicans can do, because the Republicans hold the power in this situation with reopening the government. It would not be a shame. It would be an amazing thought for the Republicans to create a new sports system specifically for, right, trans individuals. It'd be incredible. It'd be amazing. It would be amazing for Republicans to work out safety for children, create a new agency, a new police force, where every school has somebody there who's trained to defend those kids. I understand Democrats don't like guns. I get that. I understand that they put the lives of children at risk as a result of that agenda. It's disgusting. It's horrible. But still, why not? You got to sit back and wonder why the Republicans just did a Biden budget and didn't actually try for anything. Is it because they're lazy? Is it because they wanted to just look like the Democrats are the problem because the Democrats are asking for something? To me, you have the House and the Senate. Start fixing some shit, Don't just pass what's already there. It's like, it's like, why do you have so many staff if you're just going to go ahead and rubber stamp the same thing? Again, I make some statements about both sides. I understand a lot of you guys don't like that. I understand some of you have chosen your side. Some of you have personally raised and fed Biden as he was born, personally paid for the college loans of Trump. I understand that. I fully understand what you're saying. I get it. I fully support you. But at the end of the day, I guess what I'm just saying to you is, like, they got that many people on the Hill voting, and each one of those individuals has 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100 staff members. How in the F, if you claim to be a group that's trying to fix this nation, just come forward with the same Biden budget and say you're working hard? Fix some shit, A mechanic working at a low budget car, repair place is fixing more than they are. So I get it. All right. With that said, Attorney Walter Hnot, I know some of you will hate me for this video. I understand. I don't hate any of you. I don't. I think it's it's ridiculous to hate people over politics, because every 2 years we get a chance to vote more people in that can change it. That's the reality. We get a shot every time 2 years rolls around, we get to do it, right? That's the reality. Please remember to like. Please remember to subscribe. If you want to like, I know some of you are going to be mad at me. Please remember, if you enjoy these videos where I talk about specific things that aren't on the news, head over to Google, type in disability resolution, law firm, throw some stars up there if you want to. Okay. With that said, I do go live on Mondays and Thursdays to usually answer questions for free. I can't do it today because I have to go outside and work. But with that said, if you do need a half an hour or 1 hour session, mini contract is below. Also, I don't do Medicare questions or lots of Medicare stuff. So if you want to get a tune-up on your Medicare, I've partnered with this group. We are going to have future partners as well related to safety on the internet, being able to, hide your identity and stuff like that. Related to proper investments, I want to do classes on economics and have economic speakers coming in that talk about how economics works. So I want to get professors and teachers that can do basic economic understandings, and we can ask them tough questions about how, as a retired person or disabled person, what are the best steps, the initial steps to go ahead and have a economic prosperity while you are in disability or retirement land. We're going to have more people coming on in the not too distant future, and I'm really, really excited about it. Attorney Walter Hnot, you can always let these guys do a tune-up on your Medicare. I will catch you all a little bit later. You have a wonderful, wonderful day, and please, please be kind to each other. All right? It's important because success happens when there's positive energy. That's so crucial. You can't build something without positive energy of people being present. Even if you think it's wrong and it's got to be changed, be there, be happy to be there, have a smile on your face, and convince the other person to join your team. I'll catch you a little bit later. Attorney Walter Hnot, and thank you so much. And we'll rock and roll from there. Bye-bye, everybody. Bye-bye.